All right, buckle up for a deep dive, everybody. We're going deep into the strange case of Charles Severance. This one's going to take us into some dark territory murder, political mayhem, and maybe even a little NASCAR. You ready for this?
Oh, absolutely. Sounds fascinating.
Our main source for this wild ride is, believe it or not, Severance's Wikipedia entry, and let me tell you, it's a goozy.
Wikipedia, huh? Well, that's promising. I always say you can tell a lot about a person by their Wikipedia page. Or, if they even have one, I guess.
Okay, so between 2003 and 2014, three prominent folks in Alexandria, Virginia, Rufan-Lodato, Ronald Kirby, and Nancy Denning were murdered in their homes. Pretty high-profile victims, right?
Yeah, definitely not your everyday occurrences, especially in a place like Alexandria. What makes it even weirder is just how these murders happened.
It's like something out of a movie. Broad daylight, the killer just knocks on the door, shoots whoever answers, and walks away. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, just cold-blooded efficiency.
I read somewhere that this really freaked people out in Alexandria.
Oh, I bet. It's like anyone could be next. You're just home, going about your day, and bam.
Yeah, super unsettling. I mean, talk about feeling unsafe in your own home, right?
And then there's this note the investigators found. It's believed to be written by Severance himself. Knock, talk, enter, kill, exit, murder.
Chilling. Just wow. What do you even say to that?
I mean, that right there speaks volumes, doesn't it? It's like looking straight into the mind of, well, someone who's capable of some pretty terrible things.
It's tough to say for sure what to make of it. Some might say it's clear premedication, a plan laid out in black and white, but it could also be a kind of dark fantasy, a way to detach from the reality of the act, or even a messed up attempt to throw off the cops.
To like make himself seem crazier than he is.
Maybe, but it could be any of those things, and we have to consider all the angles, right?
Makes sense. So let's talk about the man behind these crimes. Who was this Charles Severance? Well, his Wikipedia page paints a picture of a guy who was, well, let's just say he was a character. A colorful character, for sure.
Oh yeah, colorful's one way to put it. Dude ran for mayor of Alexandria. Twice.
And for Congress, too. But he wasn't exactly your typical politician. I mean, can you picture a guy campaigning in a black cloak and sunglasses, railing about the dangers of child psychiatry?
No, honestly, that does not sound like any campaign rally I've ever been to.
Seriously, it's almost funny until you realize this guy also pointed a flag finial at a congressman during a debate. And get this, he punched a forum organizer, too.
Wait, hold on. He brought a flag finial, like the pointy thing on top of a flagpole?
Yep, to a debate.
Okay, that's not your usual political disagreement.
There's definitely a darker side to this eccentric persona, that's for sure. And this brings us to the prosecution's theory Severance hated the so-called Alexandria elite. They said that's what motivated the murders.
That's the thing, though. Alexandria elite. What does that even mean?
Right, it's pretty vague. Who were these elite? Were they a real target, or was that just like a convenient label?
Yeah, I mean, was it just a blanket term for anyone he saw as powerful or successful? Or did he have specific people in mind?
It's a big difference between someone who's got a hit list and someone who just has a general anger towards anyone they think is better off than them. And that distinction is super important when you're trying to figure out his motives.
Absolutely. And you also have to wonder, were his political campaigns genuine attempts to get into office? Or were they just platforms to spout off his anger and frustration?
I never thought about it that way. Like, was he trying to actually change the system or was he just trying to break it?
Exactly. And now, hold on to your hats, because this is where the story takes a turn.
Are you talking about the NASCAR connection?
I know.
Right.
I'm saying.
This is where it gets truly bizarre.
So in the 2016 NASCAR K&N West Series finale, there's a car sponsored by this company called 2D6 Chess. And it says, everyone's like, wait, this has got to be Severance, right?
The name totally fits his whole weird vibe. But wait, there's a twist.
A big one. Turns out the company was owned by Chess.com, not Severance.
Okay, so that's a bust, but that doesn't mean the NASCAR connection is totally dead.
You're telling me. There are these other races, Rumble in Fort Wayne back in 2013, then the Atlantic City 150 in February 2014, and there's this indoor race, the Battle of Trenton.
And guess what?
There might have been a Severance-connected car at all three, and his whereabouts during these races are totally unknown. I mean, come on, was this guy living a double life?
Right. On the one hand, he's this accused murderer with a, let's say, unique personality. On the other hand, maybe he's hanging out with pit crews and living out some kind of speed demon fantasy. It's wild.
This whole NASCAR thing, even if it's just a rumor, it makes you wonder if there's a whole side to Severance that we're just missing. It's like, what else don't we know? This case is already like a messed up puzzle, and now we've got these potential NASCAR pieces that might not even fit.
Right. Maybe they're from a totally different puzzle. I guess that's what we're here to figure out. So we've got these different versions of Severance floating around, the political hopeful, the accused murderer, and then who knows, maybe even a secret NASCAR enthusiast. How do we even begin to make sense of all that?
That's the challenge, right? We want to connect the dots, make a nice, neat story. But real life, especially when you're dealing with someone like Severance, it's rarely that simple.
True. People are messy. Their motives are messy. Okay, let's go back to the murders for a minute. The prosecution was all about this Severance hated the Alexandria elite angle, but we've already talked about how vague that is. What else could have been going on in his head?
Well, there's that note, the knock, talk, enter, kill, exit, murder. It's a creepy glimpse into his thoughts, but it also leaves you with more questions than answers. Like, was it a plan, a fantasy, a way to psych himself up?
Even if it was just a fantasy, that's pretty messed up to write down.
Oh, absolutely. It's chilling. I mean, does it show he was detached? Trying to separate himself from the reality of what he did?
Yeah, like he was creating a character, a persona to hide behind.
Right. It's not uncommon, actually, especially when you're talking about people who might be struggling with mental health issues. They build these narratives, try to make their actions seem justified or even heroic.
So he's writing down this gruesome phrase, maybe trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense, trying to find a purpose where there isn't one.
Could be. Which brings us back to the whole motive question. Were these murders random, or is there a pattern we're just not seeing? Something that made sense to him, even if it seems totally insane to us.
Okay, so it's got the Alexandria elite idea, which might not hold water. Is it possible he chose those victims for a reason? Like, did they represent something to him, something from his past, maybe?
Maybe. To really get that, though, we'd need to know way more about Severance. His relationships, his experiences, the things that made him who he was. Are there any clues in his writing? Or his behavior?
We can't just focus on the murders, right? We need the context. What turned him into the kind of person who could do something like this?
You got it. And that's where this whole NASCAR thing gets really interesting. Even if it is just a rumor, it throws another layer onto this whole crazy situation. It makes you wonder if there's a whole other side to this guy, a hidden life.
So let's say he was involved in those races. What would that tell us?
It would mean he could keep different parts of his life totally separate. Like over here, he's this erratic guy, prone to outbursts, not exactly fitting in with the crowd. And on the other hand, he's navigating this high-pressure, super-structured world of racing. I mean, how do those two things even exist in the same person?
It's like he's living a double life, right? Two sets of rules, two different identities. Did those lives ever cross paths, though?
That's the big question. Did the stress from one bleed into the other? Could his NASCAR life, if that's even real, have pushed him towards those murders?
We tend to think about these things in a straight line, cause and effect, but maybe it's more complicated than that. Maybe there are a bunch of factors at play, all influencing each other in ways we can't even imagine.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this case so fascinating, but also so frustrating. We want to slap a label on separates, madman, monster, something easy. But human behavior, it's messy. It's full of contradictions.
It's like we're trying to put together a puzzle, but the pieces are all from different puzzles. And we're just trying to figure out which ones belong together.
That's a great way to put it. And trying to make sense of the senseless, that's what draws people to true crime, isn't it? We want to understand the dark side, confront our own fears, maybe even learn something about ourselves in the process.
It's easy to get caught up in the mystery, but we can't forget about the people who were hurt by all this. Ruth Ann Lodato, Ronald Colby, Nancy Dunning, they were real people. People with families, people with lives. They mattered.
That's so important to remember. It's easy to focus on the killer, the how and why. But we can't treat those victims like they were just part of the story. They deserve respect. They deserve to be remembered.
Absolutely. Their lives mattered, and the people who love them, they're hurting. It's a reminder that behind every true crime case, there's real pain, real loss. And that's something we should never forget.
I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. It's easy to lose sight of that when you're digging into the details.
It is. It's like our brains want to make sense of things, even when they're just awful. We search for a reason, an explanation, anything to make it feel less random, less scary.
But with a guy like Severance, who knows if we'll ever really get it?
You're right. We might never have all the answers. We can analyze the evidence. We can go over his life with a fine-tooth comb. But there might be things we just never uncover.
That's got to be frustrating, right? For everyone involved.
Oh, definitely. You want a nice, neat conclusion, a sense of closure. But maybe sometimes accepting that uncertainty, that's part of it too.
So are you saying there's some mysteries we're just not meant to solve?
It's possible. And it's a reminder that people, they're complicated. There's not always a simple explanation, especially when you're talking about something as dark and twisted as murder.
Okay, so where does that leave us? We've looked at the murders, the political stuff, that whole NASCAR thing. We've dug into his life, tried to understand his Well, his everything, but there's still so much we don't know.
We may never know why he chose those specific victims, what that note really meant, or if there's a whole other side to Severance that we haven't even touched on.
But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not about having all the answers?
Exactly. It's about asking the questions, wrestling with the complexity of it all. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most compelling stories, they don't have easy answers.
So, what are we taking away from all this? What have we learned from this deep dive into the mind of Charles Severance?
Well, for me, it's a reminder that human behavior can be a real head-scratcher. We can try to categorize people, put them in neat little boxes, but sometimes it just doesn't work that way.
I think you're right. We can learn from this, but we might never fully understand it. And maybe that's the point.
That's a great way to put it. This deep dive, it wasn't about reaching some big definitive conclusion. It was about exploring the grave areas, the contradictions, the questions that still linger.
And maybe, in not having those answers, we're left with something even more valuable, a sense of wonder, a desire to keep learning.
You know, that's a really good point. This case, it makes you think. It keeps you guessing. Even all these years later, it still has the power to fascinate and disturb. And even if we don't have all the pieces trying to put the puzzle together, that's what makes it so intriguing.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep digging, explore the case, form your own opinions, keep asking the tough questions. It's through that process, that constant search for understanding, that we really grow, right?
Well said. Keep diving deep, everybody. Never stop questioning.
And until next time, keep exploring the world around you, even the dark corners, because you never know what you might find.